This is the Smart Buildings Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 247. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 247 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking with John Petze of he's with Sky Foundry, but he's also with Haystack. So he's got kind of a double whammy here, but he's going to be speaking on behalf of Haystack. And what I'm super excited about with bringing him into this is not only does he understand the data side and the metadata and all of that and the importance of that, but then he's also helping to lead a analytics organization, a software analytics organization. So he understands the ramifications of implementation of metadata. So we're going to see kind of both sides come together in his expertise as he communicates with us across this podcast. I encourage you to go to podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/247. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/247. It's there that you will find the show notes. You'll find the recording. You'll also find a link to sign up for Haystack Connect, which is completely free. I encourage you, if you've been trying to learn about Haystack, at least sign up and go to the intro to Haystack and learn about what it is and what it means. You know, as John says in the episode, and as I like to say, you always should be learning, and networks were really, really important to us. And those of us who learn networks, we've seen our careers blossom. Data is also really important. And for those of you who focus in and learn data, you're going to see your career blossom as well. So I really encourage you to go and consider taking a look at Haystack Connect. All right, with that being said, let's dive into the interview. All right, folks, we're here. We're talking with John, and we are going to dive into a series of questions. I've been really excited about this because when John and I talked in the pre-call, we had a really good conversation around kind of the history of data. It went probably longer than this podcast interview will go. So let's dive into, first off, everyone's talking about data, whether it's digital twins, whether it's data modeling, whether it's analytics, but what exactly is data in a layman's terms?
Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting point. Data is now fundamental to everything we do in buildings, right? And you hear it in all of these conversations. And what we're talking about is the information, the values that the different devices and systems and buildings provide to us. A temperature sensor, that's data, right? The status of a relay, the position of a valve, the position of a damper. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about operational data in the built environment.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that people, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but it feels like there's either two schools and it doesn't feel like they're meeting in the middle? Is you've got this school that is very IT centric and they're completely comfortable with data and they feel like, oh, it's no big deal. And then you've got the facility manager, maybe they're 60 years old. They've been working on pneumatics and they transitioned to DDC begrudgingly. And they're like, data. They hear that term and it just makes their skin crawl.
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
do you think that is?
I think it's because it comes out of the background of where they've been working. And we'll talk more about this. But if you've been working with any manufacturer's BAS, right?
Mhm.
You've been running it, whatever the brand is. You didn't think about data. You thought about, I have a graphic, I see the picture, I know what my systems are doing. That's what I care about. I don't care about some IT terminology. I care about that. So that was their world. The
Mhm.
topics of data are coming out because we're trying to do more things with the information and the data. And then you get into the concepts related to data. How do we interchange data? How do we describe data, right? How do we consume it? How do we map it, change it, etc.? And when you were just running the building equipment, I shouldn't say just, when you're running the building equipment, that wasn't your focus. The focus was the equipment. The data was the way you understood what the chiller, the boiler, the air handler was doing, right?
Mhm. So then, and I want you to kind of frame this in the mind of people reoccupying post-COVID with the importance of IAQ, the importance of touchless experience, the importance of occupant tracking and notification. Why does data now, in my opinion, more than ever, become important to buildings and more so building operators, and I would argue building tenants as well.
Yeah, yeah, and we would agree. We actually say now more than ever, right? You need to be able to work with the data, you manage the data, use it. And I think first reason, and I guess I'll give an analogy. There were things you could do with data that were optional to you as a building owner. Hey, if you use data effectively, you can reduce your energy costs. Yeah, I bet you can, John, but I'm busy, or I'm not comfortable with the return, or whatever, the return on whatever, right?
Mhm,
It's not optional to make sure you have a safe environment now,
mhm.
and your tenants, your occupants are more keenly aware of that, right? And it used to be, well, yeah, your temperature in your space, it can't quite hit 74. Phil, sorry, that's the limits of the building on the south side, and people grumble, but now it's like, what do you mean you can't deliver fresh air? What do you mean you can't track, proxies for air quality, right? Change, air changes per hour, CO2 levels, VOCs. What do you mean you can't do that? Now it's not really, well, everything's optional, but it's less optional than the optional benefits I might get by trying to learn to use data. I think that's
Mhm.
it. Part of it, people are recording this. I don't mean the webcast. I mean, they're recording their data because they may have to prove to their occupants, tenants, right?
Mhm.
Leases have for a number of years embraced comfort factors. Probably weren't going into, maybe they went into CO2, maybe they didn't, but now, yeah, I'll come back in the building, I'll renew the lease, but you're going to confirm, report that you're achieving these required levels.
Okay. So what I just heard you say, and I want to expand on this a little bit.
Hmm.
But what I just heard you say is that as people reoccupy and renew leases, there potentially could be a compliance aspect to it, around IAQ, around visualization of IAQ, reporting of IAQ.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why I don't want to put words in your
No,
mouth,
that,
but
that
that's what
that's
you're
that
talking
is what I'm saying, and that might be private compliance. Me as the tenant, with you as the landlord. We're gonna, or it could move into a regulatory environment. I mean, you think about ASHRAE has put out guidelines. Well, what the
about.
guidelines turn into, they turn into requirements, right? Over
Yeah.
time, state legislatures or local building codes adopt them over time, and I
Mhm.
think with the focus on this and the concern, these are some standards that might get adopted more quickly than others that were around, energy efficiency and things like that. So, but I believe there's a factor there. It's not every building, but this is
Mhm.
a factor that I think is highlighting the importance of data for people who may not have even given it any consideration.
Interesting. Yeah, and something I don't expect you to answer this, but one thing that pops in my head when I hear about IAQ and I look at the guidelines from ASHRAE, increased ventilation from outside, increased air changes, running these systems more. And then we also look on the flip side that society-wise, we're focusing on energy, we're focusing on net zero, and the two seem diametrically opposed.
Yeah, I wouldn't say diametrically opposed. I think there has to be a balance, right?
Mhm.
Let's make an extreme case. Phil, I can save you 99% of the energy in your building.
Turn it all
Close
off.
it,
Yeah.
right? You know, the energy is there to serve a purpose. Well, the purpose
Mhm.
is a balance, right? We used to say, okay, it was 74 degrees, that's all you get. But now we're saying there's other things we need to balance. And yes, it
Mhm.
may have an impact on energy, and what should come out of that is, okay, how do we help offset that? Well, now let's attend to the efficiency measures that were related to things not operating properly, right? Not giving people less, giving them what's needed, but making sure we're doing it efficiently, which,
Yeah.
I believe, from what we see in our world of analytics, is still a huge opportunity. Buildings run so inefficiently. Um, and maybe this is a new impetus to make sure people look at the operation, performance, and maintenance of their systems.
Mhm. Yeah, especially if they're stretching them to the limit to meet these
Right.
IAQ standards,
Hmm.
because you're gonna have things that were not designed for that capacity. So you mentioned working with data when I asked what data or
Yeah.
why data is important. What does that mean to work with data? Because I used to sell analytics back in a previous life,
Hmm.
and I would say data and analytics, and we're going to work with the data, and you're going to work with the data, and people would start to glaze over. They would say over dinner, so you want me to be a data scientist? And I'm like, no, I don't want you to be a data scientist. I just want you to be able to work with the data. What does that mean?
Well, work with the data is part of the process to get to the end value. That is what most of the people who run buildings care about. They don't want to work with the data. They want to know my KPIs. What are my operating KPIs? And how are they trending? Well, to get to that point, someone had to work with the data. It doesn't have to be them. And I think that's a good point you bring out, is that many of the people who own or operate buildings, they don't want to, and they shouldn't be forced to say, you're going to work with the data. That's not necessarily true, but they want the end output. They want the information. They want, as we say, the things that matter. Tell me the things that matter. Okay, your key KPIs that we've agreed you want to track, consumption per square foot, consumption per square foot per degree day, per occupant, per hours of are trending in the wrong direction. Right? Your energy use profile is getting worse, not better. That's what you care about. How did I get there? Well, I had to get meter data, and I had to get schedule data, and I had to bring those things together, and I had to run some math on them, but the end result is, here's information for you about the things you care about, right? The work with data is for, and I won't anyway go, while there are data science roles to play, the vast majority of what we're talking about with analytics and buildings, you can categorize it as data science if you want to use that new buzzword. But this is basic stuff, right?
Yeah.
This is not deep science, although you can apply deep science here, and more companies are, to get at, to do more things with the data, to do more predictive models with the data. But on the subject of why do you care about data, I'm going to throw out a thing we like to say sometimes, especially when we get to do it in person, when you read people's reactions. But Phil, do you know that the data produced by the equipment systems is more valuable than the equipment systems themselves? And people think for a second, well, pick a VAV box controller. What's it cost? $300, $400, $500?
Pretty
Run
cheap.
it wrong for a year. What did that cost? Right?
Exactly.
Well, certainly can't be true for a chiller. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay, run it wrong for a year. Right? The data is more valuable, but because it's intangible to the average person, it's kind of hard to make that connection.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't touch the data, you just look at, hey, I got a picture of the air handler, everything's fine. Right?
Yeah, I would expand on that to say not just from an operational perspective, but from a procurement perspective, because would see all the time people convinced that they needed to buy another chiller or that they needed to expand their plant capacity.
Yeah.
But then you would go analyze things and you're like, well, you're heating and cooling at the exact same time.
Yeah.
You've got your outside dampers 100% open and your chilled water valves 100% on a mixed air unit that's satisfied at CO2 return is satisfied. Why are you doing this? And so I think they miss that as well. We focus so much on the OpEx side that there's a CapEx return as well.
That's a great point. There is, and we've seen numerous cases of that where through the use of data, the final consumption of it, people learn about their systems and how they can be optimized without those capital spends, right? Oftentimes, I would say that's counterintuitive for people. That guy who's running the chiller for bore and the valves for bore probably thinks it needs to be that way because no one's ever taken the time to do a more detailed analysis of it, right? That's a very common thing. We saw that specifically, your exact example, about an organization, sizable organization, large campus, that thought they needed to expand their chiller plant, their central plant. And they got major pushback from the financial part of the organization, not because they knew better about energy, because they said, Phil, you're not getting the money. What else can we do? And they went in the way, and they found we don't need to expand the chiller plant. We really do have capacity here, but we haven't been using it wisely. We haven't been attending to other problems, here that are wasting energy. So it definitely has a play there. I'll give you another example of how it affects capital purchases is how about, and a lot of people I think we'll get into, data and analytics often is equated to fault detection.
Mm-hmm.
That's one use of analytics, right? Here, tracking KPIs and trends that aren't a fault, they're just trends. That's another. But here's another one. Recording and being able to report and analyze based on the number of service calls per HVAC unit per vendor. Why do we have more service calls on vendor X than vendor Y?
Yeah.
We didn't
Yeah.
know that. Hey, guess what we're going to do on the next bid or the next procurement? Or how about energy per vendor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or per building design structure. There's people have, even in multi-site retail, they might have 3 or 4 designs, right? Which one really performs better? And a good example we have of that was a customer, and they analyzed their building stock. They were very early on. They weren't even connecting live. They were just taking past energy data. And they found out some of their older buildings built in the 70s and 80s outperformed the new ones that were supposed to be more efficient, right? They were shocked by that. Analysis brought them to that understanding, which then you build off of. Where should we go, right? Is it the new buildings don't work right? Or, the design was flawed, or we're just not, we've deferred the maintenance, and that's why they're not working right.
Or you give people more control, and now they're starting to run the system inefficiently.
Yes.
That's one of the downsides of smart buildings is, everyone touts this whole edge building, and I see it used as a model for everything. I don't really like that because when you dig into it, you realize that it was really financed as kind of a marquee showcase for a lot of people, and you couldn't really fund it in real life. But if you dig into it, there's articles about the guy who manages the edge talking about data overwhelm. And the best one was that people would go and they figured out that if they booked a parking space, it would automatically reserve a room, but there weren't enough rooms. So you'd have people booking 5, 10 parking spaces so that they were guaranteed a room when they would come in, and it would occupy these rooms during the working period. I'm sure they fixed that, but it was a really interesting, I got to find that article.
But that's the key point.
It was good intentions, but
they may have fixed it. How did they fix it? The data showed them the problem. And that's what we're talking about. The data giving you the awareness of what is happening. We had another example of a building that was designed for net zero operation, right? Brilliant design, all of that. It got built. It didn't work that way out of the box. Why? Well, through analysis, they understood the interaction of the control sequences with the building, and they did achieve their goal, but not without being able to have tools to look at the data and understand the dynamics of these highly complex systems we call buildings.
Yeah. Net zero is really interesting to me. That's a whole nother topic, but
yes.
I want to dive into that. Yeah. I will say one thing that I think, so when I was selling analytics, it was 2012. And one of the challenges I ran into was it was very early from a technology stack. And one of the things I love about our industry, but I hate about our industry is, I suggested the other day to a guy, hey, go hire some test and balance people. They know, because he needs BAS techs. And I said, they already work with BAS. They understand HVAC. And he's like, yeah, I hired a test and balance guy back in the 80s and he wasn't any good. So I'll never hire test and balance ever again. And I'm like, for real, dude, this is the 80s. And it's like that with analytics. I went and did this analytics solution in 2010 and it cost a lot. It was really difficult. There was no metadata, which we'll get to in just a second. And so it was very expensive. I'll never do analytics again.
Yeah,
what would you say?
This is a human this is an odd human dynamic, right? What else has changed since the 80s? Or really, you're still wearing your bell bottoms? Or, so why wouldn't you expect that these technologies, think about what was the phone you were carrying and what did it do in 2012 versus today? Well, we can't accept that these other things may have advanced, that people may have advanced. I hope I know something more than I did 10 years ago, right? I don't know why people fall into that. I think it's an easy excuse, that gets used by, I think, all human beings in different ways. But we do see that in the buildings. Oh, yeah, you didn't have these features. Yeah, 10 years ago, how about taking a fresh look, right? And that just holds people back from accomplishing things that in other parts of their life they do. Are you still watching a tube TV? Or you got a flat screen, or you got an OLED.
Exactly.
I mean, TV is terrible. The resolutions. You're watching a tube, playing VHS tapes. I mean, I don't get
It
it.
is kind of funny when you look at people's consumer habits,
Yeah,
they don't match their commercial
yeah,
habits.
yeah. Big
So
problem in our industry, right?
yeah, it's so let's speak about metadata and Haystack because I'm a user of Haystack.
Hmm.
Without biasing this interview, I've personally enjoyed it. I haven't used Brick and I haven't used Google's new schema that they have, so I can't judge those.
Yeah.
But since Haystack's so easily built into Niagara and Niagara's got such great market share,
Mhm.
I find us using Haystack quite a bit in our
Yeah.
instruction to our students.
Yeah.
But what is it? How did it come about? And how is it related to data and analytics?
Yeah. And I think that's where we should start. Forget about which standard we're talking about. Why do we need to apply metadata? Semantics or tagging, those three words are basically mean the same thing when we're talking about this. Why do we care about it? Why do we need it? And it's a great question because if people haven't encountered the reasons, they're not obvious, right?
Mhm.
And the reasons have to do with our increased desire to be able to use data from different devices and systems together to learn things, right? To combine operational data, status of equipment, against energy data so you can see how they correlate. Those are two
Mhm.
different systems. You've got to bring it together and then you can see interesting correlations, right? Like we're slamming on all of the reheats at once in the morning, causing an electric peak. You got to have it. So when you're going to combine data together, it has to have meaning that can be interpreted. And I think we can start at human interpretation, right?
Mhm.
Your name is Phil Zito. What does that alone tell me? I don't know your age. I don't know where you live. I don't know what your job is. I don't know what kind of car you drive. All those things. What are those? Those are attributes that
Mhm.
different processes, whether you want to get medical insurance, housing, those organizations need those attributes, right? They
Mhm.
tags. They tags on you, right? They tag. Your age is a tag, right? Your address is a tag, if you will. It's a number of tags. But that's needed because the insurance company can't make a decision on you just by talking with you. There has to be some data record about you that they can utilize. Well,
Mhm.
that's what we're talking about when we talk about tagging. We're talking about adding attributes, but it's called tagging or metadata. And I think the next step in that is, well, why is it hard for people to um, initially grasp this? And my, how I came to understand what this barrier is they didn't have to deal with it. When you had that BAS installed by company X, they set the data up. You've got a screen. It's an air handler. You understand it. You know what it is, and it's got data on the screen. Well, guess what? Behind that, whether it's based on a standard or not, is a data schema with data attributes. That's
Mhm.
the only way that graphic could work. So metadata, it has been a part of everything we've done in BAS from the early days, right? It might have been incredibly simple. It was proprietary. It was hidden. I didn't have to deal with it, or I didn't know I was dealing with it. Think about, now I'm a technician. I'm setting up a BAS. I have to define that analog input. A dialog comes up. I have to fill out the fields in the dialog. Do I sit there and go, why do they make me fill this out? Right? No, it's needed so you can use the sensor in a control sequence. That's
Mhm.
metadata, right? But now what we're talking about with Haystack and with the whole concept of data semantics for the built environment is
What are
we need
semantics, by the way?
another way to describe metadata. It's meaning. It's how we describe meaning of things. What is the meaning of that word? What is the meaning of that data? So semantics, metadata, and tagging kind of get used interchangeably. I think that confuses people. I prefer to use tagging, but if I get into a conversation with somebody more technical, more software oriented, let's talk about metadata and semantic modeling, right?
Mhm.
So, but they, depending on your level of conversation, they all pretty much mean the same thing. All right. Why is this now important in our industry? Is we want to use the data from those different systems for other purposes than their native use in the BAS on the graphic. And we want to do that cost effectively, right? We want to do that without a lot of manual effort. If I said to you, go and manually get the current temperatures on the air handler out of your BAS and write them down on a piece of paper and bring them to me and hand them to me so I can put them in a spreadsheet to do analysis, right? You could do that. But if we want to scale that, that's not going to work out too well, right? So you say, hey, John, I can do this much better. We'll connect and we'll get the system. So we connect and we'll get the data. The problem is you're getting the data without any modeling, tagging that describes what it is. Yeah. So I'd say, hey, great, Phil, you got me the data. Come over and tell me, what's this one mean? What sensor is this on what air handler? Is it the mixed air, the supply air? All these basic things I'd need to know. And so Phil would come back over, drive over. That's not too efficient. We can't scale that either. So you don't want to waste your time doing this. So you say, you know what? I'm going to define the things John keeps asking for. So when he gets the data, it has it. And I'm happy. And you're happy. Except you created a proprietary one-off model of attributes or tags. It helped us, you and me. Didn't help anybody else. Didn't help the next guy and the next guy and the next software application, et cetera. So what Haystack is, getting to that question, is a community open source effort to agree on the attributes and how we're going to express them. So that if I support Haystack, you get the data you need in your application in a way that can be interpreted, right? And I like to use this analogy. Look at HTML for web pages. Before our call, I went to your web page. I was able to read everything on there. I didn't have to get one of my software engineers to say, hey, I want to go read Phil's webpage. Would you get with his software engineer and find out how they model the text so we can interpret it, right? That was long ago solved. The web wouldn't exist without it. HTML, open standards body came together and said, this is how we're going to tag or describe data in a file so that a web browser can read it and display the same thing to everybody. That's what Haystack is for the operational data coming out. That's the problem it solves. It works different because we're not talking text and pictures and column formats and all that. We're talking about what are the essential attributes or meaning of this data. This is a zone, temp, air, sensor, expressed in degrees Fahrenheit.
Yep.
I just told you 6 tags. Not so mysterious, right?
No.
That's what that's what you finally decided to get me off your back. Okay, every time I give John data, I'm going to say, John, zone, temp, air, sensor, degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, I'll put it on columns in an Excel spreadsheet. And if I presented it that way to you, you would think nothing of it. It's basic. I need to know this. Well, one of the cool things about Haystack is it's human readable and machine readable. A lot of times people will enter the tags right in an Excel spreadsheet because that's the tool they have at hand. And they're at the stage that the system or device they're working with doesn't express that information in any digital way. So they say, I can read the value, but I'm going to have to manually say what this is and what this is. Remember what it used to be? I know you do. It was descriptions. But what's the problem with descriptions, right? It's like your name. Let's go back to your name example. Okay. I've asked you all these attributes. And so instead of creating attributes, I'm just going to build it into Phil Zito, 40 years old, this, that, the other thing, drives this, lives here. And your name now is 1,000 characters long. Not going to work. That's what we're talking about with tagging and Haystack being an open source agreement on how we're going to tag. The first thing we agreed on is the vocabulary, right? Units, zone, temp, air, sensor, those things, which are easy for people to absorb. I go back to the BAS thing. You were entering similar stuff to set that point up on the BAS. You didn't know it. No one was talking about it being tagging. It didn't seem like a problem. It was just like, I got to do this, right?
I will say one thing that has been interesting to me about this whole tagging journey has been you get pushback from people about data, about analytics, about metadata.
Mhm.
But then as you analyze their organizations and you see that they're trying to operate a campus with limited staff, and every building has a different name for a point. And it's like, you do realize, like when I talk to owner operators and they're like, what can I do that's pretty low effort as far as not like having to physically replace things
Yeah.
that will increase my efficiency? I'm like, you can standardize your naming and metadata, because then you can train someone once on the air handler,
Right.
once on the VAV box, and it's always going to look the same. Like, I still don't
Basic.
get why people don't grasp that. It seems so freaking obvious.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like if I named something door and then I named it gateway
Yeah.
and then I named it portal, and I'm like trying to communicate, where's the portal? The person's like, I don't know what a portal is.
Yeah.
Where's the gateway? I don't know. Where's the door? Oh, it's over there.
Yeah. Right. And I want to separate those two things, because you said standardized naming convention and tagging. There are two different
Yeah.
things, and I think this is really important
Yep.
because people often misunderstand. Haystack is not a standard naming convention. It does not
Absolutely.
tell you what to name your points. That would be impossible. We do, however, say you're going to benefit if you have a standard naming convention, because you're going to be able to automate the addition of tags, because you're going to say, when I use this character string,
Yep.
SATMP dash number, that is supply air temp air handler number. And if I
Yep.
do that everywhere, now a script can go and add all the necessary Haystack tags. But they're two
Absolutely.
different things. Just like your name, right, didn't capture attributes. Even a standard naming convention, like a lot of companies do standard email conventions, phil.zito.
Yep.
That didn't, great. We have standardized email names. Anybody can figure them out. It didn't do anything about all those other attributes. So
Yep.
standardized naming, Haystack benefits if people do it. Haystack does not impose it. It is not a standard naming convention. It is a standardized method and vocabulary to add the other information to define the data and its meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because oftentimes when people have a campus and they're looking at applying Haystack,
Mhm.
or they're looking at applying metadata in general, it can seem challenging.
Oh,
But that's what I say. If you have standardized names, then you, to your point, can do like a Python script or something
Mhm.
that goes and adds that. And then I still don't get why. I mean, I kind of understand, but I don't at the same time, why OEMs are just not really dumping their dollars into a standardized metadata platform and process
Mhm.
versus all the other stuff they're trying to develop. Because if they, having been on the R&D side of things at a large company,
Mhm.
having seen how they develop things,
Mhm.
if they had a standard data semantic model, it would make everything just so much easier. I think that's the reason why so many of these startups fail, is because there's no common model to pull data out. Like you mentioned, HTTP and HTML.
Yeah. Where would you
Imagine
be without
trying to
that?
build web apps without that.
Yeah.
It would be insane.
Let's expand on this, because I can relate to our experience in launching Sky Foundry,
Mhm.
back in 2009. And I'm kind of the domain expert, and Brian Frank, my partner, he's the software guru, right?
Mhm.
And we're going to do data analytics. And hey, John, he's educating me. We're going to need to deal with this semantic thing. What? What? Oh yeah. Oh, well, okay, makes sense. Yeah. So will you, John, go out and find the industry standard on this for the buildings market? I go, no, okay, I'll go take a look. Maybe some papers have been written. It didn't get widely adopted, and dead end.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing.
Dead end. And this is 2009, right? And so, hey, guess what, Brian? There isn't one out there. Okay, well, I'm gonna look to the lessons of the IT industry, the semantic web, and concepts around how we do this, right?
Mhm.
And we have to do it, so we're going to implement a model, and we're going to draw from the world of software. I implemented it. And now it's 2010 and we're selling, and now it's coming around the end of the year and we get down and talk, this is not a competitive advantage. This is actually the barrier to adoption.
Yeah.
And so we talk to other people in industry. some people at the research labs and others and say, hey, what do you think? And they're all like, yeah, this is a huge problem. We said, let's get together and launch an open source effort. And a small number of people said, yes, that's what we need to do. And so we set up a server, and we at SkyFoundry turned over everything we'd developed, right? If you know Brian Frank, he takes a very standardized approach. We turned it all over to open source under the academic free license. And we started trying to rally people around. Hey, let's work together to solve this problem for the benefit of all, right? And that in March 2011, just a month over 10 years ago, was when Haystack was launched as an open source, community-driven effort. And that's the other thing about this. We didn't develop it all and dump it on people and say, oh, but it's open source, right? Yeah. We've been working with literally thousands of people around the world. Not all of them contribute as much as others to solve these problems, right? We had I'll give you a good example. We had a really basic model for electric meters and electric distribution panels. And someone in the community is basically, hey, you guys don't know crap about those meters. You have all of these attributes in them and all of the, hey, Phil, come on in. Help us expand the vocabulary model for electrical distribution because you know it. And put it out there for consensus debate and approval until everybody, basically fritters away, no more complaints. That's in the standard. And that's what we've been doing. And, we got Haystack Connect coming up, which I know we're going to talk about later, but we've got 2 new working groups. They're tackling aquifer-based thermal energy storage systems out of Europe. One of my areas of specialty. I know nothing about it. But there's a team of people that's really important to them. And so they have been working on the tagging model for that, right? And the other one is for VRF, variable refrigeration flow systems, which, as you know, are really...
those are huge.
They're huge. They're taking off more and more. Well, guess what? One of the major manufacturers are going to propose a model for that.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. And that doesn't happen by me. That's the community working together to solve this massive challenge.
That's neat because, up to this point, we've just had BACnet and its object model, and that wasn't a metadata model. That was an object model.
Exactly.
A lot of people mix that up because they're like, but BACnet has devices and it has its objects and it has an object model. So why do we need a metadata model? And I'm like, because that's like saying, you've got a car and it has doors, but you're not describing how many doors. You're not describing what color the car is. You're not describing how many tires it has.
Exactly. Yeah. Good analogy.
People don't realize that.
No, they don't. And in fact, that's another challenge to this whole thing because, bring out, some of the things we've learned in the conversations and trying to educate people. Project Haystack hat back on here is people say, you're talking about interoperable data, John. We've had interoperable data since BACnet or whatever, pick a standard. I go, no, you didn't have interoperable data. You had integratable data. You could get it and you could do the extra work to integrate it by getting Phil over to explain what these crazy names mean and help me decide what they are and what piece of equipment there is. And then if I do all that work, it all came together. That's not good enough. And my analogy there is, you remember when setting up a printer was like all day or get the IT staff in, right?
Yeah, that was pretty wild.
You go down to the store, you buy it, you plug it in, and 99.9 times out of 100, it just boom, it's working. How did they do that? Standardized, plug and play. Well, guess what's one of the key elements of that? Standardized. Here's who I am, what I am, how I communicate, all those things. That's the only reason we have plug and play. We could integrate printers 20 years ago, but it was painful, right? So this is the same thing. And we're trying to come out of that pain because we know we want to use the data from these different and growing amount of devices in buildings, right? These IoT devices, wow, great, this is really valuable. Yeah, if I can combine it with the other information, right, then I get more value, the network effect.
I also think it's one of the biggest barriers to scale in our organizations because we can't really develop efficiency tools because so many of these efficiency tools require standardized data to be able to act on them. So, using scripts to auto-generate graphics, to auto-generate programs. It still boggles my mind that to this day, we still have custom programming. I don't get why we do that. I know people will argue there's an infinite amount of sequences, but if you look at the Pareto principle, there really is a finite
Yes.
amount of sequences for HVAC system control.
Hmm.
And the fact that we have to program them custom each time
Hmm.
or use templates and just, I don't know, it's just inefficient
I
to
want to
me.
break this down a little bit more because I want to pick up your first example because I think it's a very good, clear way to show the value. Graphics, right?
Mhm.
I've been around in this industry, the BS industry, since the first color graphics emerged. First time ever you could have, a line drawing of an air handler with a flashing value on it, right? And over time, my saying is those have become the tail that wagged the dog, right? More development effort, more focus, and I would argue more engineering hours on projects went to drawing pretty graphics than to
Mhm.
doing a really good control sequence, right? And why was that, right? It had no other way, and there's all the demand for sexiness of graphics. But here's how tagging affects that. There are products on the market today that they can look at the tag points, know what they are, what piece of equipment, and they automatically assemble those beautiful 3D shaded graphics that
Mhm.
everybody wants to see with zero engineering effort.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been involved when that concept was presented to not unsophisticated building, and they actually did not believe that they were being told the truth because they were so ingrained that it's an hour per graphic, right? Or
Yep.
whatever, 30 minutes, right? That goes away. Now let's go to your mention about control sequences. We'll leave out the question of are there a finite number? Let's and I think this is one of the things that hurts our industry. People want perfection black and white. If you
Yep.
can't do every possible, control sequence out of the box, then you need total programmability from no, right? Okay. You can write control sequences, have them there. They reference tags. As soon as you add equipment with tags, the control sequence finds it and starts controlling it. That's
Mhm.
happening today if you have tag data. Right?
Yep.
Then, I think you get to a philosophical question about how far, how close to zero can you get on the need for programmability? But you can get well down that road. We've seen it happen with terminal units. They're configurable now.
Yeah.
And air handler controllers are pretty much configurable. It's at the system levels that you may need programmability. But I'd also say some of the products haven't exploited the fact that terminal units and air handlers can be configurable versus having to be programmable. Right.
Yeah.
And so people are still programming them unnecessarily. Yeah.
I'm going to make a statement that may be a little controversial. I think that the only way you're going to see that really happen
Mhm.
is either a OEM is going to agree to take a massive cut on their branch structure, or it's going to be a startup. Because if an OEM goes and rolls out something that significantly reduces labor, either they're going to have to retrain their sales force to go and sell integration or sell some higher value,
Yeah.
or they're going to have to get rid of all that staff because they're going to have greater efficiency.
Yeah. Well,
And
nobody
those
likes to see a top line go down, right?
Yeah, those are billion-dollar branch structures
Yeah.
that you don't turn an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
Well, actually, aircraft carriers are pretty maneuverable. People don't know that. They say you can't turn it. Maybe a cruise ship.
Yeah, there you go.
So it'll be interesting to see where that development comes from,
Yeah.
whether an OEM's willing to bite that bullet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that gets to your, I think you mentioned earlier, where is the adoption, or we're going to talk about where's the adoption with the major
Yep.
manufacturers. Obviously, Tritium has embraced tagging, and they include Haystack among, and that's the other thing. One of the things about Haystack is it's an extensible
Yep.
methodology in two ways. One, working groups can come together and say, okay, here's the improved model for electrical distribution, and here's the first ever model for aquifer-based thermal energy storage system, and on and on. But the other thing is you can use the methodology to create custom tags you need for your own purposes, and they're still
Mhm.
readable by an external application. It would have to know what it wants to do with them, but it still comes out in the same defined methodology via the API and the data structure, right? So it's immediately readable. Where do the different manufacturers stand on not only adopting it, but publicly embracing it, and those are two different things. And I'll give you an analogy. I'm executive director of Project Haystack, and I draw a really hard line between that and my day job. That's my night job. And I know there are people on our forums who work for major manufacturers in their product groups, but they register with their Gmail addresses. Okay? And I know there are companies using Haystack that don't admit it, don't advertise it. They want to keep it hidden, right? It's unfortunate because I think it's holding back the whole industry, because we're not seeing the network effect of people are really doing this.
Yeah.
We're not helping the people understand, no, this is just part of our lives today, right? It's part of where everything's going to work with data. And it doesn't help with the people who ask, well, how widely deployed is this? Well, I can't, I don't have the right to tell you that manufacturer X is using it. They just won't admit it.
Yeah.
And that's been an odd thing that I track back to the protocol wars, right?
Yeah.
Right. Everybody went into a camp, and at that time, we were Tritium, and we fully supported BACnet and fully supported LAN, and it created some of the most amazing conversations. Right, we go in and talk about our BACnet tools, and then on the coffee break, they good, you're against that LAN work stuff, and I'm like, well, I didn't say that. Well, you're doing all the BACnet. Yeah, and then I go the next meeting, show our LAN tools. Good, you're against that BACnet. No, what's warfare, right? We got
sure, whatever will make you make a buying decision.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I like Modbus.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
There's a great example of why you need metadata, right? But anyways, I think that pervaded our industry for a decade or more, and it did end up as a war, and it was not productive. But I think manufacturers became very gun shy. There were some big manufacturers who went all in with one or the other, and then had to switch or whatever, right? We'll leave names out, but I think it created a psychology of people. Oh, yeah, okay, we'll just watch this. Yeah, it's pretty good. We'll use it, but don't say anything yet. And that's holding back the momentum of the industry of solving this in a universal way for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's disappointing. And then having been at OEMs in the past, knowing that, especially with something being open source, they'll often take it and then customize it onto their own rather than just following it in its purest form. And that just further exasperates the issues. And it's like, what is that old saying of something spiting your foot to save your hand? I don't know. But that's what they're doing. They think they're protecting some sort of IP when I don't think organizations have realized that the product really isn't their product anymore.
Right.
We're all pretty much on parity as far as products go. It's really the ability for the tools and then the higher level applications.
Yeah. The value that can be derived from them, and the data has more value than the equipment, and the solution has far more value than the data. Right. But I think it goes up against the long-term ingrained industrial models of a lot of the BS suppliers that they financially track based on selling things in cardboard boxes. Right.
Absolutely.
And it's tangible. How many cardboard boxes did we ship this month? Right. And I think that's part of it. Now, you mentioned, will a startup solve this? I think we've seen, I've been involved in a number of startups in the BS industry, with differing degrees of success, Tritium being a very different type of, technology because it was sold to all of the manufacturers. But it's very hard to, even if you have the best solution, it's very hard to break through to wide scale adoption. And the time in our industry is so slow. I believe the only way a startup can cause change will be by the threat they exert, not by the revenue model, but by the revenue amount, but the threat. And one of the OEMs or more, we got to do this, right? We got to do it, right? It's
or
time.
They buy them.
Yeah, well, that may be the way they buy them. That's what I meant. We're gonna grab this and make it part of our business or whatever. And so at the end, the industry did change, right? I mean, it's a very different industry today with so much of it using Niagara-based technology than before that happened, right? It didn't solve every problem, but it's very different because you can get competitive service, competitive bid, competitive install around Niagara-based products, right?
Let's switch gears because
Mm-hmm.
I don't want people to miss this part, which is Haystack Connect. So it's at haystackconnect.org.
Yeah.
And it's coming up here. It's going to be May 4th to the 6th. I really like that you all did it kind of over the lunch break.
Yeah.
I feel that that was a very creative use of time,
Mm-hmm.
because that's kind of when everyone, they wrapped up their morning meetings. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a good time. There's several things that popped out to me here of like the Haystack in practice and then the technical track. So as I look at the Haystack in practice and I look at the education market, that's the one that I am personally most excited about right now because of all the money that is earmarked for IAQ requirements. Depending on who you read, it can be up to $100 billion
Mm.
earmarked through the K through 12 and higher education market
Mm-hmm.
for IAQ and HVAC and just those kind of improvements. And
Yeah.
so let's talk about just Haystack Connect in general, and then let's talk a little bit about these different tracks and these different sessions. So
Okay.
take me through this.
All right. So I told you 2011, we launched this open source initiative and we set up a server and we, got people together and we did it all, email and this and that. And we had a discussion forum and we got the effort rolling. In 2013, we said, you know what, we got to pull the community together, right? We got to have a technical meeting. And we created the first event, Haystack Connect 2013, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And, we launched a meeting and we had over 150 people show up, right? And I would say that more than half of the people who showed up said, John, I don't know why I'm here, but you guys are doing something that sounds important that we ought to learn about. So I made the trip, right? And that was the launch of what's it about? Why is it about? What's interesting about some of the keynote speakers we had there, Department of Energy, keynote speaker, high profile guy, and someone from Autodesk who painted the picture in 2013 that all of the data, the design, the operational, the sensor it has to and it will merge together. And if you think about it, that's where this digital twin thing is going, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so we created this event and it's technical presentations of varying degrees of technical, right? Some are business and applications like you identified, some are deep for software engineers. And here was one of the unique things about it that was really cool. Every other conference, you may go to Tritium's conference or Johnson's or whatever, those are controlled by the company, the manufacturer, right? There's rules, rules on what's acceptable and what's this, but it's more than just rules. It's defined by their culture, their singular culture. Here's an event that isn't controlled by any single manufacturer. It's where people working on open source come together to share and solve problems together, right?
Yeah.
So there'll be a small table with those guys doing aquifer-based thermal energy storage systems because there's only 10 people who get it, right? And there'll be a huge table of people arguing about electric meters, right? And there'll be all these presentations. So it's technical presentations, and we made it biennial every other year. We didn't think, we couldn't take on the load of trying to produce it every year. And then,
I heard that.
but we felt that was frequent enough because the work continues, but this when we come together. So we did it 2013, 15, 17, 19. And for those who've been, I know this is probably some of your list. It's a fun event because we're a little looser than corporate, environments. We have a band, we have all that. But guess what happened? COVID happened.
Yeah.
So in an odd way, I think we've all seen negative and positive business effects out of, we're not talking about the effect on humanity and our families, but we've seen some things are helped by this and some things are hurt. Oddly enough, going to a virtual format, this is purely virtual, right, has helped one thing. There were more people in the world who wanted to come and participate and contribute than could ever get authority and money to travel. We are over twice the last, we're already over twice the last attendance, right?
Yeah.
Well over 500 people. And you've got past history shows 35% of the people sign up in the last 10 days, right? Okay.
Yep.
So that's a benefit. The other reason it's a benefit is, we're allowing pre-recorded and live. So the guys in Singapore, Australia, or Czech Republic, they can pre-record and their content still gets delivered as part of a live continuous event, right? And lots of organizations have done this. And there's great diversity. Like, it wasn't me as executive director who said, I've got to find someone to speak on K through 12. No, there's somebody in the community that's immersed and they're going to speak about it, just like the other major topics. So it has great diversity and great collaborative spirit and energy, because that gets at one of the things that's very unique about Haystack. It's not just the output is open source, software. The process is true open source worldwide community to wrestle down these problems, solve them, contribute, debate, argue, and agree on consensus. That's very different than any of the others out there right now.
Do you see yourselves maintaining a hybrid model going forward for the
Yeah,
conferences?
I think it'll always be hybrid, because I don't think you can, if we can get back together and have fun and a few beers and have a band again, that'll be great. But you'll never be able to stop the virtual component now, because it serves this other audience. And we've all become more familiar with doing it, and the costs have come down. We looked at adding a virtual component. We weren't going to call it that. It was going to be an online component in 2019.
Yeah.
But what it would have taken to do it, cost-wise and technology-wise, et cetera, in 2019, which doesn't seem that long ago, has completely changed, right?
Yeah.
Now it's viable to do that. When we go back, in 2023 to in person, I guarantee it'll be hybrid. That's a permanent thing. We're doing that back on the Sky Foundry side. Because our event is in the fall, we're going to be able to hold an in-person event, but it's going to be hybrid because it will be forever now.
Yeah. It's a much lower barrier to entry.
Yeah, it is. And you want the people there, right? And we're all more comfortable with doing this type of stuff and participating this way.
So I want to talk to two audiences here. So someone stepping into this from the owner-operator side, where should they focus?
I think they should focus on understanding the value of interoperable data, that they can combine data, and why they should have a data strategy. And then taking advantage of guide specifications that will help them specify, whether they're going out to a formal tender or they're just trying to, negotiate with a contractor. This is what we want you to accomplish. We want our data to be tagged, with Haystack tags, so it's interoperable. And focus on that. They don't have to become expert in the details. They shouldn't try. They should understand why they want to be able to use their data. And again, I'll go back, Mr. Owner, your data is more valuable than all that capital equipment you just put in, and let them scratch their head for a moment and challenge it, and we can prove it, right? So data strategy, and in fact, we've had a number of Haystack presentations that is where you need to think first. And when you think about, okay, I care about my data has value, how can I use it? Well, then you fall into, it's got to have semantic modeling, tagging, metadata, whatever term you want to use, depending on the audience. That's where they should start, is be thinking about a data strategy and the data they have available. That's one of the things we often say. What data do you have available, or available with what level of difficulty, right? And it turns out there's lots of data that is available easily. And yes, there's lots of data that's much more challenging to get.
Okay. So now to our second audience. So contractors, technicians, programmers, they're coming into this. Where should they focus?
Yeah, they need to learn the details, right? They need to start with the entry point to Haystack, the primer, right? What's it about? What's the concepts we're solving? Don't worry about all the gory detail. What are the concepts? How does a standardized vocabulary work? How does that then extend to relationships between devices and ontology relationships and those things? It's not something you learn in a single day, right? And I think that's part of the challenge. Why do people think it's hard or do it? It's new. Hey, I remember, I don't know if you're old enough, the transition from pneumatics to DDC. There were a whole bunch of people. Hey, I connect pneumatic tubes. What's an analog input, right?
Yeah.
It was hard. It wasn't hard. It was something new you had to learn, which we often, quickly say that's hard. Yeah.
Yep.
But it isn't hard. It's something new
It's
we
just
have
a
to learn.
different set of processes,
right,
and thought processes.
And so they need to learn the basics. And there's lots of materials on that, but we'll admit we have produced so many materials over the years that it might be hard for people to find an entry point. One of the sessions is going to be, getting started with Haystack, right?
Yeah.
How do you get started with it? But as a system integrator, the other analogy I'd make, let's roll back 10 years ago when the big talk around a lot of the shows was, hey, Mr. Contractor System Integrator, you need a networking guy. You need
Yeah.
to understand networking and IP. They didn't before. They just connected the manufacturer X networks, whatever it was, and they knew how to do that because of the book, and they didn't know what the data principles were. It was just, okay, I connect this, it's all together. No, you have to understand routers and subnets and VPNs and now any system integrator does. There may be control contractors who haven't bridged that, but system integrators, there's no argument. You got to have a guy on staff or multiple who know that.
Yeah.
Guess what? You got to have a guy on staff who understands data and data modeling and data concepts and principles. You have to. It's part of our world now, right?
Yeah. I would expand on that to say you need someone who understands data principles and concepts and models, but not a data scientist. We're not expecting someone to go into R and start writing algorithms to consume data sets, but we are expecting someone to be able to analyze an existing site, figure out what the to-be data architecture should look like, what it is currently, and then figure out a mitigation plan for that. And that requires very little programming.
Absolutely. This is a great point. I'm really glad you brought it up. You do not have to be a data scientist to understand Haystack and start using it effectively, right? As I said, you can use Haystack with a yellow sheet of paper as a way to uniformly capture important information so I can give it to Phil. You can do it in Excel, or you can do it in JSON and XML and all that, but you don't have to. Right. The most important thing is understanding the principles of we're going to characterize this equipment and their data with a standard vocabulary, standard organization, so we understand what these things are. And I would say a good test is the human test. Can I tag this data so you could understand what this sensor valve is, what it's connected to, and all of that? That's a great test. You do not have to be a data scientist. What we're doing, though, is making the information from our systems available to the data science so they can do their stuff, right?
Yep.
They can run their algorithms, analysis, et cetera. Because you know what one of the greatest barriers is, and there's a great article on, I follow lots of these things around data science for the level I can play in with it. And data scientists talking about, all the algorithms are magic. You know where we spend most of our time? Characterizing the data. Another word for tagging it and modeling it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
Providing
not fun
context.
grunt work. They hate it, right?
Yeah.
Because if the data arrives to them with no descriptive information, no metadata, they have to spend all that manual effort. If it arrives there tagged, then even if it was tagged with a different standard, you can write parsing routines to interpret it.
Absolutely.
Ideally, we should all have one, like we have with HTML. But the fact you have any that's consistent and based on a defined, knowable standard will greatly help us all move forward.
Yeah, I think we'll get there. I think this should be in every standard for new builds going forward, or every spec for new builds going forward. They should require some semantic model to be adopted, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I know we're at an hour now, but anything else you want to add for the audience prior to us closing out?
Yeah, I would say I would go back to Haystack Connect. There's no cost to attend the virtual event. The detailed program, I mean, there's an overview of the program, but the detailed program will be posted, I think, later this week. Sign up and come to one or two of them. Come to the intro ones, come to the deep ones, whatever. Start getting familiar. How do you learn about a subject, right? Well, you can go to school. Well, we're all working. We have a job. What do? You read, you learn, you ponder, you think, now something came up in my job. They want to talk about tagging. Yeah, I've been studying that, boss, right? I can help with that, or I want to help with that, right? This is part of our future, just like IP networking became, like direct digital control became. Hey, guess there was something before pneumatics, right? That somebody probably complained when it changed to pneumatics, right? So there you go. That's what I would say is get involved, but don't make it like some huge burden that you have to learn it all at once. Just this is part of the future, right?
Awesome. Well, perfect.
All right.
All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Once again, go to podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/247. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/247. There you will be able to download the audio if you so choose. You'll be able to get the show notes. You'll be able to listen to the recordings. You'll be able to get the sign-up link for the Haystack Connect conference as well. I encourage you to check all of that out. I will see you next week when we will be continuing our talk on retro commissioning and operations and maintenance. We're going to be focusing heavily on the owner side for the next probably month-ish. All right. Hey, thanks a ton. Good seeing y'all. Have a great Have a great rest of your week. All right. Take care.